I've seen this very commonly with avoidant men is they don't want to take on the responsibility in their own life, whether that's a relationship or outside a relationship. We're looking for a woman potentially who combines all the different qualities about other women that we've met that we like into one woman. Is to express what you want and what you need and what you think and what you feel, while also being okay with the fact that the other person you're with is allowed to have a reaction. As soon as the emotions start coming in, it becomes overwhelming. Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and it's one of those rare episodes where it's just me and you. And it's not a mini episode, because I also do those. If you haven't come across those are my little mini episodes that are like 10 minutes long, where I dive into a topic and either I give a very broad overview or I go very deep on one particular piece. So today I'm going to be talking about dating and relationship success for avoidant men. Preface that with that I am an avoidant man. And I've been in very many relationships, avoidant / anxious relationships with women who are anxious. And I'm talking attachment styles. So I thought I'd do an episode on this because I haven't done one yet. Me and Orsa will do an episode about our relationship and how we've made our relationship work as a avoidant, anxious couple, because I think, especially if you read the book Attached, you get the sense that, you know, you're kind of fucking doomed if you're anxious and avoidant. And I want to say that it's really not the case. And this episode is for the men who are avoidant, to help them. But I want to talk to you about my up-and-coming program. I used to run an 8-week program, which I've now changed into 12 weeks. So my 12-week program, which I've called Being an Authentic Masculine Man, aka BAM, with some A's and M's, is starting in September. And I've had incredible reviews and feedback and testimonials from the men that did it last time round when it was 8 weeks. They've just seen massive transformation in their life. Men leaving feeling like they are changed men, like they've come out the program a different man. They've learned how to express themselves. They've learned how to ask what they want. They've learned how to have deeper intimacy, lead their lives, like all sorts of things, you know, and it's just been really powerful to see. So I'm running that again. It's going to be 3 months and it's an incredible experience. I do a lot of breath work with you. I do a lot of masculine practice, you know, to ground you in stillness and presence and so forth, so you can make decisions from that place. And it's amazing. It's some of my best work. I bring in a lot of the different work that I'm learning from the teachers that I'm learning from, as well as the things that have really helped me mature and grow as a man. So if you want to register for that, you can register your interest in the show notes. There's a link there. You click it, you put your details in, just name, email address, that sort of thing. And, you know, then we can have a conversation about how that works. So today's episode, we're going to talk about some kind of common characteristics and behaviors that you see in avoidant men, how that impacts their relationships negatively, as well as rejection. We're going to talk about rejection because it's an important piece, because avoidant men feel rejection very deeply. I'm going to talk about how the avoidant men can create kind of healthy relationships, healthy dating lives as well. And we're talking about some specific tools that men can use. And these are all things that I've used myself. These are things that I've learned through my journey, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, as well as the many clients I work with. I work with a lot of avoidant men. So all in all, this is going to be an epic episode. And I don't need to do that whole thing about jumping into the episode because it's just me. So then give me a bit of an introduction to me and my avoidance, because it might not be that obvious, right? If you've seen me through the podcast, you've seen my Instagram content, you're going to be like, oh, Dave is an open-hearted, sharing, vulnerable, emotional guy. And it's like, I wasn't always this fucking way, right? There was a long time where I didn't want to say how I felt. I would avoid certain conflict situations. I even refused to be in relationship for a while. You know, there's a while where I just wouldn't get into relationships. I'd meet women who are amazing. You know, I can really test and say I've met some really, truly amazing women in my time who have been lovely and wanted depth and all those things. And I was just like, nope, relationships don't work, go away. I don't want commitment. And even then when I did kind of get into a relationship with some of these women, it would be off the back of like, I would be seeing them casually for anything from 6 to 12 months before I would be like, I know I really like her, but do I want a relationship? And then I might consider it. You know, one of my ex-girlfriends, my last proper girlfriend before I was with Orsa, it was 12 months between us meeting and us getting into a committed relationship. There was a lot of on and off during that period as well. I had this whole thing about all women being needy, not believing I could be emotional. You know, I hated telling women I loved them. That was a big thing in my relationship as well, is that I just didn't want to tell women I loved them. I was like, why do you need to hear this all the time? Like, I've told you once. Of course, it's not changed in the last, 6 months. Why do you need me to tell you again? That was a big thing for me. Expressing love in general was difficult. I didn't really express needs because I would just take care of all my own needs, which has this impact. And we'll talk a bit about that later on. And I shut down all the time. I didn't share my problems. And I would avoid talking about anything about the future, like marriage, kids, that sort of thing. It really scared me. And to be honest, the fear has not disappeared. I just know a lot better what to do with that fear. You know, I am aware of that fear instead of just being unaware of and reacting to that fear. I now respond to that fear as I choose to. So where are we going to start today? We're going to start with 16 signs, right, that make it clear that someone is an avoidant man, right? We're talking about 16 common behaviors and characteristics that someone's an avoidant man, right? I'm going to reel them off, then I'm going to go into some more detail about them, right? Feeling like the women you like don't like you. This is a really nuanced one. I'm going to get into this in a bit. Avoiding expressing fears and worries or wounds or anything like that. That's another one that I see in a lot of men. I see in myself. Enjoying the thrill of the chase, but avoiding depth, right? Being conflict avoidant, avoiding and suppressing emotional expression in themselves, and also downplaying emotions in their partners, the women they meet. Struggles with vulnerability, often to come with the suppressed emotions, and uncomfortable with sharing personal details and experiences. Avoidant of commitment, standard. Doesn't want to take responsibility for the dating and relationship situations. A lack of empathy for other people's emotional experience. Takes a long time to like someone and get to want to be with that person. Fault finding is another one. I see in myself and also a lot of men, highly critical of the people they meet. So there's an internal criticism that's always happening of themselves and also the women that they date. Always looking for better, always looking for something better, whether that's an improvement on the woman and characteristics of her, but always looking for better. It comes with the criticism. A fear of being dependent on other people. This is another one as well. Prioritizing the self over other people, and cheating as well. Cheating is a really common one in avoidant men as well. So now I've given you those 16 characteristics and behaviors associated with avoidant men. I'm going to get into those a little bit more. And there's a lot, isn't there? But there's a feeling like the women they like don't like them. This is something that's been very common, not just in myself and a number of my clients as well, especially the ones who are single, obviously the ones who are single, is like, the women they like don't like them. And this is an interesting one because there's a level of truth and then there's a level of not truth in it. Is what often I see is that for myself is that, you might fall for a woman who's, quite healthy in her attachment and way of being, and she might not be interested in you. I'm going to say you, right? Because of the way you're acting with this inconsistency, avoidant tendencies, and then she won't want that. That's something that I definitely see. But the other part of this is also that what I've seen in myself and other clients and my clients is like avoidant man starts to like somebody, and then he starts to change how he's acting. He starts to become more inauthentic. He starts to do things that he thinks he needs to do to get the woman to like him more, right? And he becomes hot and cold, and those things turn her off often, right? Avoiding expressing fears and worries and wounds, because if they're afraid this can be used against them, is a standard one. It's very clear. They won't express how they feel because they're worried about someone using that against them, someone using their fears and their worries against them. And that's happened to many of us. And it will continue to happen to many of us, but it isn't necessarily a reason not to express our fears and worries and concerns. And then there was the thrill of the chase, enjoying the thrill of the chase, but avoiding depth. Now, this is because during the thrill of the chase, there's no commitment. There's just a fun end goal, the chase, the enjoyment of chasing someone and getting them and getting to be with them in some capacity, whether that's sleeping with them or getting a date or getting a phone number even. I've seen that with a few of my clients, that they are really wanting to meet women, they get the phone number, and then they completely die out and they don't bother to pursue it, because it's almost like they've got the dopamine hit from the thing they wanted, and then they just kind of check out at that point. And that can sometimes be the phone number, that can be a date, that can be sleeping with somebody, that could be regular sleeping with somebody. That just depends on the different people. That's definitely something I've seen as well. But the avoidance of depth is a lot around the fear of closeness, which I'm going to touch on as well. The fear of deep intimacy, the fear of being really close to somebody. Avoidant men, they want to keep their independence, right? I can see this for myself. We're afraid of almost like losing ourselves and becoming codependent. Codependency is probably like the most horrible situation for an avoidant man to be in. He doesn't want to be in a codependent relationship because he's afraid of losing himself. He's afraid of losing himself and being at the behest of somebody else and their feelings and their wants and their desires. Avoiding of and suppressing of emotions. Again, this is one, I still have to battle with this actually, of expressing what I feel in my relationship and not being like, it doesn't matter, it's not important, right? Because there's this underlying thing of like, my emotions don't matter, or emotions don't really matter, or I'll just get over it on my own, right? Struggles with vulnerability. We've seen it with men. It's like a struggle to be vulnerable. It's very easy also to think that like all of these things are just how men are, quote unquote, right? You're not watching a video, I am watching the video. I put my air quotes. Like, this is how all men are. But all men are not like this, right? A lot of men are anxious men. I've worked with a number of anxious men as well. The reason why most men will appear to be avoidant, this is a really important piece. The reason why most men will often appear to be avoidant is because that's how men are often socialized in the way they should act. The way that society kind of tells men they should act around love and dating and relationships. They should be ambivalent. They shouldn't really care. They should be cool and calm and all this. So a lot of men step into acting in a way that's avoidant when that's not really who they are. But they do that just so A, they look like real men, and B, that they will be accepted as well by other men. That's another thing I see with a lot of guys, right? So it's worth noting that as well. Avoidant men often don't want to share things about themselves, right? I've seen this with some of my clients. They're so worried that if someone knows something about them, that they'll be able to be used against them at some time, that they don't want to really get into the details of who they are. And that's understandable. And then we got the commitment, right? And I understand the fear of commitment, because commitment takes a responsibility, and there's an expectation around commitment when you've committed to someone. And I want to separate two things out. I want to separate out two types of commitment, right? And often when we talk about commitment in our society, we are talking about the first one I'm going to mention, sexual exclusivity. Now, sexual exclusivity is not commitment, right? And I'm going to explain more about that. Sexual exclusivity is sexual exclusivity. It's like, I'm not going to sleep with anyone else, or I'm no longer sleeping with anybody else, right? And the second level of commitment in my eyes, it's not a second level, a second type of commitment, is a commitment to growing and deepening the love and the relationship, right? The sexual exclusivity and the commitment of deepening love and the relationship, right, are not the same thing. And we often collapse them into meaning the same thing, that if someone commits to us sexually and commits to exclusivity, that means they are committing to deepening love. And that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. And this is where polyamorous relationships, in my opinion, can be very not advantageous, but they work, is because when you're polyamorous or you're in an open relationship, marriage and so forth, right, you're committing to the relationship and the person and deepening that. But you're not committing to sexual exclusivity, which is fine, right? You don't need sexual exclusivity to have a good relationship. And I think this is the thing we often collapse in our society. We collapse relationships, we collapse exclusivity and sexual and commitment. And a lot of the times it's the commitment that an avoidant man struggles with, is the commitment to deepening the love, deepening the relationship, because of the fear of losing oneself, losing, being, what's it called? Being, the words have skipped me, but no, it's being responsible for someone else's emotions. That's a very heavy thing, right? For an avoidant man, doesn't want to be responsible for someone else's emotions, because then someone's dependent on him. And that's, it's not fun, and I must say, I've definitely been in relationships where, and I've seen it with my clients, where they're like, oh, my partner's dependent on me. It feels like a huge burden. It restricts freedom and the ability to make one's own choices, right? Lack of responsibility, this is something, is like a wanting to not really take on the responsibility of the relationship and someone else, but also responsibility of their own lives. I see this very commonly with avoidant men, is they don't want to take on the responsibility in their own life, whether that's a relationship or outside a relationship. They might have super great jobs and they're happy with the responsibility there, but there's definitely always areas in their lives where they don't want to be really responsible for what's happening, whether it's the responsibility of doing the work to maybe overcome wounds and trauma, or being responsible for their drugs use, alcohol and substance use. There's just an avoidance of responsibility. Responsibility feels heavy for them, right? That's something that I've seen in myself and also in other men. There's like a lack of empathy as well for other people's emotional experience, because the avoidant man isn't feeling his own emotions and feelings and the sensations of emotions. It's very hard for them to understand the feelings that other people have in response to his actions and his feelings, or his thoughts, and his speech. So if someone gets anxious about him wanting time alone, he's like, what's your problem? What's wrong with you? Stop being stupid. And I'm basically saying the things that I've said in the past, right? Because you're like, well, what's your problem? Like, I'm just taking time alone. That's it. He doesn't hold the same sort of meaning, right? The emotional meaning, right? And I will touch on this a little bit, the whole concept of how we make things mean something beyond what they are. And I'll just use it here. If I, David, I use my partner also, if I say to also, I'm going to go out for the day alone, she may say, what time are you going to be home? And I'll be like, I'll be home late in the evening. And she may go, is everything okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. I just want to spend some time on my own. Now, she could make that mean that she's done something wrong. She could create a story that I'm upset, I'm annoyed, and maybe I'm going to leave her, and all those thoughts could go through her mind. All those fears could ripple through her mind, creating deeper and deeper stories, allowing her to spiral and deeper and deeper into that, right? So that's story. That's how we create story and meaning. So often we have different stories and meanings that we create as partners around different events. So we will have completely different stories and meanings we create. So it's something like that often the avoidant man lacks empathy. He cannot see other people's points of view and so forth, and definitely can't understand people's emotion and reactions to those things. Well, yeah, it takes a long time to like somebody, because he's holding back constantly. The avoidant man is holding back how he feels, or his willingness to lean into the relationship, lean into the dating experience, right? Lean into the feelings and emotions. And part of that is because he's not acquainted with and doesn't feel his emotions very well in general. But part of it is because he doesn't really want to. Right? He wants to keep space. He wants to take it slow. He's afraid of what happens if things go too fast, right? Fault finding. This has been an incredible find that I've seen in myself, but I've been working with someone in particular around this and helping him really create some space from these thoughts around thoughts, because he finds all these thoughts in people, and it really destroys relationships from the inside out, from within his mind, and it just keeps cycling around, and he starts to dislike somebody or hate certain parts of them, or things that they do, or things that they say, sounds they make, whatever it may be. This is a part of being an avoidant man I see very commonly, is finding faults and criticism. I'll lump that in with the criticism. And often the criticism doesn't necessarily come out and vocally said. Sometimes it is, but it will just roll around his head, who might not like the way you eat, for instance. As an avoidant man, you might see how your partner eats and be like, God, why does she eat like that? God, this is so annoying that she eats in that way. And every time you see her eat, it grates on you a bit, but it's because the focus is going there to the fault and not to the rest of the person, the amazing and wonderful things about them that are there. And it also connects with this piece about looking for better. Yeah, looking for better, looking for more. Because in many ways, our society teaches us that, better is always out there. And, better is a completely subjective thing, but we can always kind of look for better and constantly looking for better. And even what I kind of call this kind of cyborg thing that we're looking for a woman potentially who combines all the different qualities about other women that we've met that we like into one woman, right? So she's some sort of like superhuman cyborg that has all the greatest qualities of all the women you've met in the past or you've seen in the past merged into one. And we're looking for that person when that person doesn't exist. That perfect person with all those things that you love about them doesn't actually exist. And that's a big problem. That person only exists in the avoidant man's head, and constantly searching for them just leads to endlessly searching. I've met men who are well into their 50s who are avoidant men who have never really been in a proper relationship because they've constantly been cycling this in avoidance, just looking for better, finding fault. Some of them have been in some short relationships here and there, and these are very eligible men as well. So it's a real problem for them as well. I touched on the fear of being dependent on others, prioritizing self over others, and also the last one, cheating. And I think this cheating piece is down to a few things why avoidant men cheat. I think one of them is definitely because they can't express how they feel, right? They're cheating because they can't express that they're dissatisfied with some area of the relationship, right? That they'd like to change or they'd like to end. They're avoiding conflict because usually ending a relationship leads to conflict, right? As well. They're not feeling their feelings, and maybe they're dissatisfied with the relationship and they haven't really cottoned on to the fact that they're dissatisfied with the relationship. They've not been able to express it or even feel it themselves. And also there's this wanting better and wanting more. I think those things kind of combine together to cause the man to look for something else and to cheat. And then often, I know of the avoidant men I know, and I know a number, and I've coached, when they cheat, it usually leads them to the conclusion that they should end the relationship, which they often do, or often wait for the woman they're with to end the relationship as well. Right? So there's a lot of juice in those, and I could get deeper into those, and I probably will as we get through a bit more through the episode. So the next question really comes is like, how do those traits, characteristics, and ways of being impact dating and relationships, right? So the first obvious one is that the avoidant man ends up in these very shallow relationships, that they're often fun, right? Avoidant men can often be very charismatic and fun, especially when they've learned to navigate the early stages of relating, right? That they can be funny, they can be interesting, they lead interesting lives. They try new things, they're adventurous, they're risk-taking and so forth. Those are the things that make them super attractive, right? And those are things that make them super attractive, but they also kind of keep them in this kind of Peter Pan way of being. If any of you are familiar with Enneagram work, you'll know that there's different Enneagram points. You can look up Enneagram. And a number 7 is the kind of standard avoidant man. I'm a number 7, right? And they're known as like Peter Pan. They want to experience everything and try everything. But that also keeps relationships really shallow because they just keep trying having new experiences, doing new things in relationship, and avoiding the emotional depth in a relationship that is needed to turn it into something committed, right? Remember my definition of commitment earlier. They're avoiding the emotions of commitment because they're afraid. They're afraid of the closeness, intimacy. When I use intimacy in this context, I don't mean sex, sexual intimacy. I mean closeness, like being seen, being looked at deeply. There's a fear that if the woman they're with sees them deeply, she won't like what she sees, right? This is a big fear for avoidant men. Often they don't feel they're good enough. And they can mask it with all sorts of ways, but they're afraid they're not good enough. And I also note, I realize I'm talking very heterosexual terms. I imagine you've got used to this on my podcast by now, in man, woman, but I don't need to explain that, but I put that up here. And I know from talking to some of my gay friends and bisexual clients that the avoidant anxious thing is the same across gender. And also from talking to also about her clients as well, and also talking to some of her clients. So this thing for avoidant men is they don't want the relationship to reach emotional depth, because then they're out of their depth, right? As soon as the emotions start coming in, it becomes overwhelming for them, right? And this can be horrible for a woman who is so often anxious people and avoidant people come together, right, in relationship. Some of that is to do with them, I think, subconsciously. If you read the book, Get the Love You Want, Harville Hendrix and Gay Hendrix, I think it is. I can't remember. Helen Hendrix, sorry. That's it, Helen Hendrix. They see that we're looking for partners often, right? And this is a really important piece. We are often looking for a partner that has traits, right, and values that we have suppressed in ourselves. And the second part of that is we are often attracted to people due to the positive, negative traits and values they have that remind us of our parents, right? And this is almost really subconscious. We don't even realize that, right? Like I look at myself, and my mum is a super nurturing, loving person. Very nurturing, loving, and forgiving, actually. It's probably three of her like most prominent traits. Almost all of the women I've dated are that way. Like in a serious sense, the women that have been in a relationship, almost all of them have been that way. Very caring, very loving, very nurturing, very forgiving, right? And there is a part of me, unconsciously, but also very consciously now, that like wants to be able to love more deeply, wants to be able to express my emotions better, right? But for years, subconsciously, I was going to relationship to experience that, and then being annoyed by the women I was with who were expressing their emotions in that way because it was overwhelming for me. So this comes down to it. This is one of the things. The avoidant man is afraid of really going deep into his emotions because he hasn't been there. It's a dark place. He's scared to go there, right? One of the other damaging things that happens when, for an avoidant man, a relationship can be the impacts. It keeps people at a distance. There's a lot of push-pull, hot and cold. If you want to know more about hot and cold, I did another solo episode. I can't tell you exactly the number, but it's hot and cold. Push-pull, hot, cold, I think it's called. Something along those lines. And people have really loved that. But I talk more about this push-pull and why people do it. It's like getting close, pulling away, getting close, pulling away. And, in the days of when the pickup artists were coming out, they said that is the way that you attract people, right? That's how you attract a woman, is with this hot, cold, push-pull, being mysterious. Now, a lot of what they perfected was basically brought through, rings true when both people are in insecure attachment and not trying to do any healing, right? To get better, or unaware of the insecure attachment, just think that's the way it is. And, obviously that's the way a lot of people are in our world. But when you start to do some of the work, which I'll talk about later on, to start healing your attachment, becoming more secure, communicate and feel more deeply, you'll become less attracted to the push-pull, right? It won't happen overnight. It can take, and I'll be really honest with you, actually, it can take years, If you do it on your own, it can take absolute years. If you get the support of a community or a coach, you can kind of cut that down maybe into months, between months and a year, to really move through that in different ways. I've definitely seen it with some men actually who've gone from being very avoidant, don't feel their emotions, don't express themselves, to being very open-hearted, very expressive, very loving, very close to their partners. So it can really shift and change. One of the other impacts, right, on avoidant men, right, due to their ways of being, their characteristics, is their own loneliness. There is often, I see this with a lot of avoidant men, is there's a deep feeling of loneliness. It takes them a while to get there to that feeling, but there's a feeling of loneliness that they want to get rid of by being close to people, but they're so scared of being close to people that it doesn't go anywhere because they keep their distance. But that can also manifest inside a relationship, right? And that can be really sad for an avoidant man to be lonely in a relationship, to feel misunderstood, to not feel cared for, and so forth, because they're unable to express themselves, or they're unable to, when they do express themselves, the reaction they get from their partner is overwhelming to them, right? Which we'll talk about in a bit, actually, because I think that's a really important point. Obviously, they fear the closeness, right? Avoidant men feel the closeness, and the fear of the loss of their freedom. For avoidant men, losing freedom is a big thing. Like for me, it can be very unconscious/conscious sometimes, where also will say something to me, and all I hear her saying is, you can't do something, you're not allowed to do something. I literally misinterpret the words. I have my own story, as I was talking about earlier about story. I have my own story about what these things mean, and that's where I will go with it, right? I go to my story of like, oh, she's trying to stop me from being free. I'm not allowed to being free. And then I interpret what I'm hearing. And this is something I see with a lot of avoidant men is that they are constantly interpreting, am I free? Am I allowed to be free? Do I have my own space and all these things? And they're very sensitive to any behavior that they interpret as impinging on their freedom and not allowing them to have their own personal space and alone time, right? And then they react very big to that, right? This can come from childhood stuff. Like, I had a mother who still is pretty nosy when she wants to be. God bless my mother, I do love her, but she can be very nosy, and it can feel, I grew up in a place where I didn't always feel like I had a huge amount of privacy. I lived with, my 3 sisters and my mum. So a reaction to that for me has been to, seek freedom and so forth in my life, right? And that's one of the things that happens, right? Our attachment styles are grown out of our wounding in childhood and so forth, right? But they are not fixed. I say that again. Our attachment styles are not fixed. They can change. They can even change from the people that we meet, right? And I could get into this now. Sometimes our attachment styles shift based on the people that we're with. I've definitely fallen into being very anxious with certain women that I've met because they are like ultra avoidant, and I've really fallen for them, and they've been really hot and cold. And then I've been super anxious and worried about where things are going. So, it can be flexible, but we do have a predominance to where we go. And for me, my predominance is avoidance. So another characteristic that really impacts the relationship is also around wanting alone time. This is something that's super important to me. I think the way alone time nourishes me and helps me relax into myself is really beautiful. And I see this with other men, and not just men, women as well. But it's like being alone for me, it kind of gives me space to recharge and not be responsible and have to manage and be with other people's emotions. Sometimes having to be with my partner's emotions or other people's emotions and, having to be mindful of them is quite taxing. So when I'm alone, I can just be alone. I don't have to worry about what other people want, what other people need. So that is really nourishing to me. But if we're in a relationship or we're dating somebody, it can actually be, especially someone who's anxious, it can be really triggering for them when you suddenly want to be alone for the weekend or don't want to reply for 3 days, right? Because their mind goes into anxiety and kicks into the anxiety gear and is like, what's wrong? What have I done wrong? I've done something wrong. And then their mind spiral on all the things they could have done wrong and they could have messed up in the relationship. And that can lead them to do some really crazy fucking shit. Actually, I'll take that back. It can just lead them to reacting to the story that is being created in their mind. So say, for instance, you disappear for 3 days because you just didn't fancy replying or having to like keep up replying. That might trigger for your partner or the woman you're dating a whole ream of abandonment feelings, feelings of not being good enough, feelings of not being wanted, feelings of being alone forever and so forth. So they spiral into that, worrying about that, could be worrying for days while you're not replying. And then when they may send you another message during that time, it might be an angry message, it might be a pleading message, it might be a crying message, it could be all manner of things, right? And when you pick that up as avoidant man, you're like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, I just had some alone time. Why are they so upset? Why are they so worried? Why are they called the police because they think I'm dead? When all it was you took some alone time, right? But their whole mind has been on a whole journey that's taken them somewhere else, right? A whole journey. The power of the mind, the story of the mind is the piece here that we often forget. And it's not to say that avoidant men don't do a similar thing, right? My story, and I'm sure many of the other men around me stories, is like around freedom. Like freedom and autonomy. Like, oh my God, I'm not going to be free. If, she asked me to go and put the trash out, like she's controlling me. Oh my God, if it stays like this in years' time, I'm going to be controlled. I'm not going to be able to go out. I'm not going to be able to go to the gym and all these things. And then that story flies around your mind and causes you to react in certain ways, to shut down, to go cold, to not want to talk, right? So those things are all at play. Or if yours is criticism, for some people, their big story is criticism. They'll be like, oh my God, she's, put on some weight, right? Let's be honest. Sometimes our partners put on some weight. They'll be like, oh, she's put on some weight. Fuck, I'm going to be unattracted to her. Then I'm going to be stuck with this person who I'm not attracted to. And then the sex is going to be shit because I'm not attracted to them. And then I'm going to be trapped because I'm in a relationship with them. And then, the sex is going to be boring. And then I'm going to be unhappy and I'm going to be miserable. And that's the story you start reacting to. And this is the one of the parts I'm going to touch on, about how to get out, how to kind of start to heal our attachment style, because we have to be aware of the story that's running in our mind. And sometimes we're really unaware of the story. We think the story is the truth, right? When it's just a story. Another thing I know that really affects avoidant men who are in relationship, impacts their relationship negatively is feedback and criticism. Avoidant men can be really bad at taking feedback and criticism. The story they create is about their not being good enough, about them being something intrinsically wrong with them, and they often shut down and spiral. And that shutting down that often happens and not expressing what they're feeling creates anxiety in their partner, right? And you can see there's this vicious trap of like shutting down, not expressing how they feel, getting space, and so forth. Because getting space can often be a response to feeling like they're overwhelmed from their partner's emotions. So say, for instance, your partner is anxious and they express a lot of big emotions, right? This is something I see a lot in clients. It's like they express a lot of big emotions. The partner, the woman, express a lot of big emotions. The man hears the emotions and struggles with them, but doesn't really say much, just shuts down, emotionally overwhelmed, emotionally flooded, takes some space to recharge, right? But this taking space isn't requested, it's not explained, it just happens. A man just takes the space. I'm very guilty of this. And then the woman who is anxious and just expressed a lot of big emotions then goes into even deeper anxiety because she's expressed big emotions. She hasn't really been validated. She feels like she's being ignored. She feels like she's being abandoned. And this crap makes the relationship worse and worse because you keep spiraling in this spiral. She will then seek out to feel closeness, which will then push the man to want more time alone. and so forth. And this is the anxious avoidant trap that we often find ourselves in. So, rejection. Let's talk about rejection, because I think rejection is a really important part of the dating piece, especially for avoidant men. And actually, let's talk about dating as an avoidant man. So maybe we haven't touched on that, but like dating as an avoidant man is, being highly sensitive to rejection, right? Perceived rejection. And also the criticism piece comes in a lot, right? So the perceived rejection will be, you're an avoidant man and you're dating, and you won't take risks, for example, of talking to a woman in a bar, for instance, who you don't think is going to say to welcome your advances, right? So you might avoid going over and speaking to a woman at the bar unless you absolutely know that she's going to be a yes and want to talk to you. So you're going to wait for all the signs that she's into you, right? If you know what they are, right? And if there are any signs, or you might even ignore them, because then ignoring the signs fits into your already existing idea of yourself and the fact that you're going to be rejected, right? This is the way it can really affect avoidant men's dating experience. And also the dating experience can really be negatively affected by if you are not willing to kind of share how you feel about someone, that whole like, oh, you've been on a date with someone, end of the date, and you're like, oh, cool, had a nice time, see you later. And the other person's left being like, wow, did they enjoy that? Am I going to see them again? I don't know. And I know a lot of the old books around dating would tell us that, it's good to create that mystery, but we're not children anymore. We're mature adults. Hopefully, a lot of the men I work with are in their 30s and 40s, and actually expressing how you feel is a sign of maturity. And it's something they often want in the women is maturity as well. So this can negatively affect a man's dating life, because the people he's dating, the women he's dating, are often like not knowing where they stand with this person, and they're in a state of anxiety often of like, oh, do they like me? Do they not? But it can also lead to you losing out on dating opportunities because you're an avoidant man, you don't share how you feel, and you've been on a date, and then you don't message the woman afterwards because you're like, oh yeah, if she's into me, she'll message me. Neither of you message each other. And then she was like, oh, I liked him, but he didn't message me. And then nothing ever happens, right? That's definitely something that I've happened in my life, whether that's on dates or even when I've been seeing someone for a while, they just felt that I wasn't interested. And I've seen this with clients. I can think of one of my clients who went on a date and, he just got preoccupied with other things and didn't see the signs that the woman he was with was interested in, and it never really went anywhere, right? That's something that happens quite often, or this can happen in our relationships as well, right? So this avoidance of depth, of feeling, of even sharing how we feel, these really negatively affects the dating life, because you're always holding back, you're always avoiding leaning in. And that might work well when you're in your 20s and you're with women who are equally insecure in their attachment style, right? But when you start moving and you start dating women who are more mature, you're going to find that this causes all sorts of problems for your dating life. And I know this because, clients come to me to help me with their dating lives and relationships, and they want maturity, but they don't act maturely. So, rejection. Avoidant men feel rejection very deeply, right? They're deeply afraid of being rejected, right? So they try and avoid rejection, right? Because when they get rejected, they feel that there's some sort of shame, toxic shame, there's something wrong with them, right? So when an avoidant man experiences rejection or perceived rejection, he takes it as a sign that there's something wrong with him, something shameful about who he is. So he does his best to avoid it, whether that's in relationship, like sharing how he feels, or in a dating sense, putting himself forward and being vulnerable, right? Because when we're vulnerable, we are often in a state of nakedness. I might talk about my deepest joys and deepest loves, and someone can look at you slightly disapproving, and we can perceive that as rejection. So how can an avoidant man start to become more adept at being with rejection, right? Some of it is realizing that someone isn't rejecting you, right? They're not rejecting you because they don't know you yet, right? No one knows you completely. They're rejecting the idea that you have presented of you, or the perception that you've presented of you, or they're rejecting the perception that they have of you, right? because, we have our own filters. So we're filtering information through what we think about other people based on ourselves and our experience of the world. So really, rejection isn't personal, right? When someone does reject someone or perceive rejection, they're just saying yes to what they want. If someone sends me an email and they want to be on my podcast and I say no, it's not about them. It's about what I want. You see that subtle shift, that subtle difference? It's not about something wrong with you. It's about me choosing what it is that I want in my life and I want for myself. Another important way to really be with rejection is getting perspective. Often we are so zoomed in on this moment, as I'm like here with my microphone. I'm so zoomed in into the microphone. I don't see anything else around me. When I just take a few deep breaths and I move back, I see there's a whole world other than my microphone. And it's a bit like that when we're dating or in relationship, right? If we're dating, the woman we've just met isn't the only woman in the world. So if she has said no, she doesn't want to date you again or see you again or give you a phone number, the world, the life, everything isn't over. And it doesn't mean that you're never going to meet someone else. It just means that this woman here has chosen something different. And it's important to get that perspective in the moment. And then if we're in a relationship, that rejection could be our partner not having space to listen to us, or not fully understanding us and our emotions and our experience, or saying no to something that we want. And again, perspective, we just zoom out a little bit and go, wow, that's just this moment here. And it's not going to be like this forever, right? There's a lot of projection for the avoidant man, right? And there's a lot of projection for a lot of people when it comes to how we are in relationship. An avoidant man is projecting to the future and thinking of the doom and worry. I think another important part for around rejection is challenging the negative thoughts about that story. To really deal with rejection powerfully, we have to start seeing that like the story we create about rejection is a thing that actually causes us pain, not the rejection itself. It's the story we create that we loop around in our minds, and we tell ourselves that, everything's going to be terrible in the future. That's the story that creates all the worry, the fear, the stress in the moment, not the actual instance of perceived rejection. And that is an important thing to start challenging. I also, when my clients have come to me and they said they feel rejected, I do some embodiment practices with them, like, feel it. Like, what does that rejection feel like? To get them to actually feel the emotion. Because what's happening is they're connected to the story and not to the actual feeling of feeling rejected in this moment. And we want to act it out. We'd be like, with sound, with movement, with words, like to get the whole body involved, to start to really allow that to come through. There's different ways that you can release that rejection and feel the whole emotion in the moment instead of trying to bypass it, rationalizing it, getting caught up in the story. That's some little tips in there. So how can avoidant men navigate the challenges of kind of creating and maintaining healthy relationships, right? While also kind of giving themselves their own space. Now we start getting into the strategies for dealing with our avoidance, right? First things out, the most important thing I think for I would say the three most important things, right, for an avoidant man to learn to be better and have happier relationships and dating lives are open communication, right? Feelings and emotions and expression. Those are two things I think are massive. And also needs and wants, expressing needs and wants, and also being willing to receive needs and wants. Let me go through the whole list I've got here, right? So the first one is open communication. To have a happier, healthy relationship as an avoidant man, you need to learn to communicate openly about what you want in the relationship, how you want things to be, right? Irrespective of how the reaction comes back. And that's the hard part, right? Is to express what you want and what you need and what you think and what you feel, while also being okay with the fact that the other person you're with is allowed to have a reaction. They're allowed to have a reaction to what you want, what you think, what you feel. And knowing that it's an iterative process, you're going to have to keep being open, keep being honest about it, instead of shutting down and keeping it all to yourself and trying to meet all your own needs. Expressing how you feel. And this is an important part, because to express how you feel, you have to know how you feel. So you have to get in contact with your feelings, right? And I can't fully take you through the process of getting in contact with your feelings right here and now, because there's many different ways that you can work on this, right? And I have my program, which I mentioned earlier, is a perfect place for this. We do a week or so on just the feelings and emotions and getting in contact with them and expressing them. But the basics are, you got to notice that they're there. You got to feel them, give them space to be felt, and express them in some way. It can be words, actions, movement, sound, however you choose to, right? Often we express our emotions in words. That's probably the most common one we use. So learning to do that, that will help with, and that's something you have to practice. It's a bit like a meditation. Like, you do it every day to get better and better at it, right? And sometimes it won't feel like you're getting better. Sometimes it'll be easier than others, but it's well worth the practice. And I say this as someone who struggled for many years with feelings and emotions. Feelings and emotions, didn't understand them, couldn't make sense of them, didn't have empathy. And when I started to do the work to feel my emotions, express my emotions, my relationships became infinitely more joyful and happy. Now I'm in a 4-year relationship with also, like, this wouldn't have been possible without the work that I did before we met, and the work that I continue to do through our relationship in the beginning, the middle, and continuing. It's been a continual process and does continue, this feelings part, because there's so many layers to it for me, of years of not expressing, or not feeling I'm allowed to express, not feeling I'm going to be listened to, and all sorts like that. Another piece for happy relationships, for avoidant men to really keep in mind, is like practicing love, affection, and closeness. Love can feel like a really alien expression, because often that can make you feel uncomfortable. I know a lot of avoidant men feel really uncomfortable with expressing love. And I've got a mini episode actually about this piece, what to do when your partner is asking for more love, where I go into a bit more detail about this. But cultivating the ability to express love, some of it's through words. It can be through words of appreciation and care, and how you feel about your partner, how you feel about your date even, right? Because if you're dating someone, the simple thing of saying, hey, like, our date's just finished. I really enjoyed tonight. I really enjoyed speaking to you. I really love the way that X, Y, and Z. Like, I'd love to see you again. That's a way that we express care, affection, and love. And it goes a really long way to creating healthier relationships, being honest about how you feel in your dating life, in your relationship as well. And one of the ways that I recommend, there's various meditations I like to use. And if you're interested, send me an email and I can send you over one of these meditations of cultivating love and paying attention to the physical sensations of love, right? And feeling that in our body, right? Because all our emotions have a physical signature. And often with love, we're unacquainted with it. We're not really connected to it. We're not used to feeling and expressing it. And it's just so important to practice that, because love is really the bedrock of a good relationship, affection and closeness as well. You got to learn to ask for space. This is something that's so important for our relationship, is asking for what we need and want, but particularly for avoidant men, learning to ask for the space that they want. Like saying, hey, I need an hour to myself, or I'm going to spend Sunday all on my own, or I'm just going to sit here and watch football. Like, asking for the space you need and want, or at least notifying someone of the space and time you want instead of just taking it, right? Now, I get this feeling you might hear of this as like, oh, I don't have to ask for permission. You're not asking for permission. You're just telling somebody for clarity, so they know where you stand and you know where you stand, right? And this will make your relationships infinitely better. This is something that I've had to learn, and I still get tripped up on this one, is just saying to also, like, hey, I just want to be alone for a few hours. I'm going to go out for a few hours. I'm going to go for a walk for 2 hours. I'm not asking for permission. I'm just telling you what I'm doing. Because when though you are an independent, free being, having the decency and care to tell your partner, like, you're going to be out of contact for a bit, right? Or even if you are dating somebody, that might be just saying, hey, I'm not that great at replying to messages, so I might only reply once a day. Something as simple as that can go a really long way, but it shows a level of maturity that you understand what your needs and wants are and you're willing to express them, right? That puts you above so many other men out there, right? Another key part is for healthy relationships, especially for avoidant men, but this is for all people really, is allowing your partner to have the space to have an emotional experience and to express what they feel, and not trying to shut that down all the time, right? Or belittle their emotions or say they're wrong or bad. This is a really, really important part, is like allowing your partner to have their feelings and emotions and be able to just sit and hold and listen, like that, holding space, just to sit and listen to their emotional experience and go, yep, okay, you're feeling that, cool. There's a wonderful technique that when we do couples work, I mean also a type of dialogue that we use with couples, and it literally transforms their experience of their partner's emotions and how they communicate. You know, makes a massive, massive difference. So if that's something you want help with, again, drop me an email and I'll ping you that over, because it really is transformational as a structure. But allowing your partner to have the emotional experience and express that, right, without telling them they're wrong or that's wrong, that, you know, that's, they shouldn't feel like that. It's just validating someone else's emotions and feelings, you know, and allowing them to be there. Another important part, I think, for maintaining healthy relationships for avoidant men is depth, is allowing yourself to go to the depth of yourself. That might be diving into your wounds, your father wounds, your mother wounds, diving into your fears around freedom, your negative beliefs about not being good enough. The depth of who you are is going into those and doing the work, because that will really massively benefit your relationships. Because instead of projecting all your fears and your worries and your insecurities onto other people, you'll start to take responsibility for them and go deeper into them and kind of alchemize those into gifts, into lessons and insights. That's what I did. That's half of why I'm here doing this work, is because I did that work with myself. Also, learn not to shut down, men. When you feel criticized, there are going to be times that your partner expresses what they feel, and it's going to feel like criticism, right? And the truth is learning not to shut down, and actually better to express like, hey, I feel like you're criticizing me here, or I feel that's unjust, right? Is much better than just shutting down and going silent because you feel hurt and you're going to run away, right? And this is a practice, right? It takes time to learn this. It won't happen overnight, right? So it's something you kind of work out. I would also say is an important part for happy relationship is actually learning to trust what your partner is saying instead of the story that you're creating for yourself, especially as an avoidant man about freedom and so forth. It's like actually dropping out of that and being like, oh, yeah, that's a story. I have a story about freedom. And admitting that, might be admitting that to your partner, like, when I heard you say you wanted us to go to your sister's on Wednesday night, I felt that as like you telling me what to do. But I get that you were just saying that's what you want to do and you'd like me to come. And those two things are different. That can go such a long way in a relationship to understanding each other, right? So some specifics, some things I think avoidant men have to do to really overcome to start to heal the attachment wound, become more secure, but also really have happier dating and relationships, right? Self-awareness. Self-awareness is a big, big thing, right? It's a big kind of big piece, right? And it's huge and it's everything, right? The self-awareness to be aware that your thoughts are not reality, right? That your feelings are not a fair reflection of reality either, right? Being aware that you have this tendency towards avoidance, right? If you're listening to this, then most likely you have, or someone has sent this to you, right? It's a really important piece. It's just to notice that you have this tendency towards this avoidance, right? And being aware of that is not the truth of reality. That is not the truth of all women. Not all women are trying to clamp you down and stop you from being free. It's seeing that that's the lens by which you see the world. But also having the self-awareness to see that, you know, your emotions and thoughts, again, they're not real. And actually having the self/social awareness to see how your actions are impacting other people. That's also a really important part to getting to happier, healthy relationships. It's just seeing that, oh shit, how I act impacts other people. That impacts the women that I meet, the women that I'm with. And part of that self-awareness piece is also looking at reflecting on our past experiences, right? and the patterns, and seeing the patterns and how they played out in the past, and taking responsibility for those patterns, right? It's very easy for us to be like, oh, all when I meet, they're too needy, why they're so needy, blah, blah, blah. And actually going, well, wait a minute, what's your part? What's the pattern here? Oh, I experience people's being needy when they ask me for something. It's this awareness of like dropping back out of the pattern and observing the pattern, looking at the pattern, being like a hunter, hunting for the patterns in the way that you cause them to happen, that you get triggered during the patterns and so forth, and how those patterns may be linked to your own insecurities, avoidance, and lack of confidence and beliefs about yourself and the world, right? And this is where, this responsibility / self and social awareness, or relationship awareness, you can call it, comes in, is that we start to take responsibility for our patterns and going, oh, this is me. This is how I'm showing up. This is the things that I've done to trigger this. Let me start to be super aware that when these instances or these circumstances start to arise, I'm aware, oh, actually, you might see your partner's asking you to do something. You might go, I have in the past mistaken this for being told what to do. I'm going to stay present. I'm going to breathe deeply. I'm going to feel the ground. I'm going to stay grounded. I'm going to connect to my heart, stay open physically, and so forth, so that I don't get lost in my head, in the fear and the worry, and get flooded, but I stay in the moment, present to what's being said, present to my partner, what she's feeling. As you notice there's a few physical things I recommend. Is like, some call them self-soothing practices. I prefer to call them self-regulation, emotional regulation, nervous system regulation practices. I'm very often breathing deeply in difficult situations. The moment I start to feel a bit stressed, I will often just, I'm aware of my body, because I've done enough meditation that's introspective meditation, meaning meditation where I'm feeling into my body and my emotional experience, that I'm aware of how it feels when I get stressed or I get worried. So I will bring in tactics, tools, deep breathing. Sometimes I might just take a big, deep breath in and breathe out slowly. Breathing for me is probably the easiest one I go to when those stressful moments come, is learning to do those sorts of things to regulate yourself in the moment. But I also am a big fan of like shaking and various types of embodiment practice that I do every day to find myself in a very regulated and calm way throughout the day, meditation, breath work, and so forth. A tactic I've talked about, communicating openly, just saying how you feel. When we learn the tool of communicating openly as avoidant men, our relationships suddenly will be 90% better than before. Simple as that, right? Yeah, we might have to deal with our reactions from our partners, but we are actually expressing what we want and what we feel, right? In a way that's constructive as well, and not blaming, taking full responsibility. I am feeling, I would like. When this happens, I feel. When this happens, I don't like this. Like taking responsibility, not pointing the finger like, you keep doing this to me, you make me feel like that. That's not taking responsibility. I think one of the key parts, and I've mentioned this already in the podcast, but as a strategy for, having happy relationships and happy dating lives, emotional intelligence, emotional capacity, right? Learning to feel and express your emotions. This was an absolute game changer for me. And it came through a few different experiences. Some of it was coaching, some of it was plant medicine, some of it was breath work, some of it was meditation as well. I learned to be so much more aware of what I was feeling. And once I was more aware of what I was feeling, I was able to express that to somebody else and know how things make me feel, how when something else happens, how my reaction to that is, and not to misplace reactions onto other people and what they're doing, but see it as my reaction to a thing that I'm interpreting as happening. Because when we are not in touch with our emotions, it was almost like we're playing catch up, right, with them. We'll have an emotion and feeling. We don't realize we're having an emotion and feeling. And we only get it when our bucket's really full. And suddenly we're like in this massive stress, fight or flight response. And we don't really know what's caused it. We only remember maybe the last few things that's happened. And actually, there's been many things along the way. And I think this is why coaching is really powerful, because when you're talking to someone or counseling or men's groups, you're often talking about how you feel. So you're talking about it, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling this, and this is what's going on for me. And I was connected to this thing. And then you can express it, and you let go of it a little bit when you express it as well in words. But when we're not expressing it, we just keep building up. We get full. We're like a glass that is just teetering on spilling over. And if you're unaware that you're there, then the outcome when you reach your emotional peak or you become out of capacity can be explosive sometimes, can be anger, violence, massive amounts of stress, huge shutdowns. So learning to be in touch with our emotions mean that we're far more easily able to empty our cup ourselves, but also stay calm and relaxed and fully in the capacity of our brain to use all of our cognitive function. This next one for avoidant men can be really difficult, right? And it's being less judgmental about others and self. I know, again, from the number of men that I've worked with, that this like judgmentalness, this criticism of self can be huge. Perfectionism can even creep in, but it's this way of berating about ourselves, but also that gets reflected onto other people about them not being good at certain things and not looking right, they're not looking good, like all this kind of criticism, right, and judgment is something we have to kind of train ourselves out of, and that might sound difficult, but it's actually a really simple process of actually giving more perspective and seeing the whole person, not just seeing someone as body parts or characteristics or character pieces. They're not just, if you're familiar with internal family systems, they're not just their inner child, their angry child and so forth. They're a whole person that you're dealing with. So just coming back from that, giving some perspective on someone and people really helps. I've talked about this a little bit already, which is about challenging negative beliefs and stories. Super important for us to have happy relationships as well. Practicing vulnerability. I haven't talked about this so much. I'm a big proponent of this. For an avoidant man, vulnerability is uncomfortable, right? Because the fear is that his vulnerability will be mocked, his vulnerability will be pushed back, or he will be viewed as weak, or whatever it may be. A lot of the stuff around how we view men in general if they're vulnerable, right? We've all had some sort of pain of being a man and being vulnerable and being pushed away. So that's a big thing for avoidant men. And that's something we have to keep in mind. But the vulnerability is what helps us be closer to people. It's what is some of the glue that makes relationships beautiful, is when we can be vulnerable with each other, right? And we can be accepted and seen. You can practice this in relationship, but you can also practice this with friends, right? Like I've been lucky enough to be part of numerous men's groups, the ones I've ran, but also the ones that I've been a participant in, to practice the vulnerability and feeling the acceptance from other people is often acceptance I've never felt before in other instances. So practicing that is really, really important. Healthy boundaries as well. Learning to communicate your boundaries as well, because often avoidant men don't really have boundaries, they don't really have boundaries. They kind of just assert their boundaries kind of silently without necessarily to say them, but learning to communicate your personal boundaries in a relationship can be really important. And, some of the other things I think really important for avoidant men is really this working on being better, depth of self, like moving out of the logical into maybe the felt sense, even the intuitive, is really, really beneficial for me as an avoidant man. Because I think often as avoidant men, we can just be super logical about everything. Everything has to fit into logic and so forth. But the moving into the more esoteric, moving into the more intuitive work has enabled me to be a lot better at feeling and a lot better at moving back and giving space to, that's been like meditation. It's been my tantra work. It's been some of the embodiment work as well that's really helped me. It's just like, the world is the way it is. Like there's no way that the world should be, or it's wrong or it's right. And it's just like, no, it just is. Like taking on some of these ideas, some of these ways of being have been so useful to me to give space to, and not kind of want to be forcing things to be a certain way. And maybe that's just me personally, but I've seen that also work really well with a lot of my clients as well, and men on my programs, just bringing some more of the felt into their experience of life. So I've talked a hell of a lot there. Wow, surprised I thought I'd only get up to about 40 minutes. But so this is me talking about some of the things that really, helped me on my journey as an avoidant man. And, the journey never ends, right? As something to say, it's like you'll never, I don't believe, you'll never be completely not avoidant. You'll still have some of the tendencies, but you'll be able to spot them. You'll be able to see them coming, and you'll be able to clean them up afterwards as well. And that's the most important thing, really, in the end, is like, can we see the way we're being? When we are being that way, can we see we're being that way? And when we've been that way, can we look and go, yeah, I've been that way and that didn't work, and take responsibility? Because when we can do those things, actually, we'll make less mistakes, and the people around us will be more understanding because we'll be taking responsibility. So, yeah, that's a lot of my goodness for today. If this episode has helped you, or, especially if you're a woman and you're listening to this and this has helped you, made a lot of sense about avoidant men that maybe you've been attracted to, maybe that makes some of the sense about why you've been attracted to them as well, then send this over to a man, help him out. Man, if this is you're listening to this and this has helped you, send it to another brother, share the love. Simple as that. It's not shameful to send it to somebody else. It's actually a massive act of service and an incredible gift as well. And if the topics here for you, especially around emotional expression and depth and awareness and self-awareness, and we didn't even really touch on and intimacy, we didn't really touch on sexual intimacy, like closeness and, perspective and the esoteric and so forth, feel like they're calling you a little bit, right? Then my program, which I mentioned at the beginning of the top of the program, my 12-week program that starts in September, will be absolutely perfect for you, because these are things we're gonna really hold you accountable to developing, and you're gonna be in a practice space of other men who are kind and compassionate and understanding to help you grow, right? And especially also in there, the capacity to express love is something we practice within the group. We learn about it a lot. So like, if these are things that you want more of in your life and you've enjoyed a lot of my work and you're this far in the podcast, then the chances are the program will be wonderful for you, right? It'd be great for you, and I'd love to have you on, and it could be a really life-changing experience. So you can just register down in the show notes. I'm pointing, but you will never see the pointing because you won't see this video. Go into show notes, click the link about registering, and you'll be fired off straight to me, and then I will contact you and we will talk about the program and how it can help you. But until next time, people, ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. Especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them. Share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.